It was a quiet night in North Carolina, the kind of stillness that clings to lonely highways. Audrey, just 11 years old, sat in the passenger seat, watching the faint glow of passing road signs. Beside her, her mother, a careful and cautious driver, kept her eyes on the road. They were heading home after a visit to family. What should have been an ordinary journey turned into a night they'd never forget. A sudden flicker of red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror, faint and irregular. Audrey's mother frowned, the sound of the siren unnervingly weak, like a child's toy. Suspicion crept in as they pulled over, uncertainty hanging in the air like a storm about to break. The car came to a stop on the side of the deserted highway, the engine's low hum the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. Audrey's mother tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the soft glow of the dashboard lights. Outside, the faint flashing lights from the vehicle behind them cast unsettling, sporadic shadows along the asphalt. They waited, the seconds dragging like hours, and then came the sound, slow, deliberate thuds of heavy boots approaching the driver's side window. Each step seemed to echo, louder than it should have in the stillness of the night. The man who appeared was not what they expected. He was short and stocky, his figure outlined by the car's headlights. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but what was visible was far from reassuring. His unkempt hair, scruffy beard, and disheveled clothes didn't match the professional appearance of any law enforcement officer they'd ever seen. Audrey's mother immediately felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. He knocked on the window, the sound startling in the quiet. With slow, deliberate movements, she rolled the window down halfway, just enough to hear him but not enough to expose herself. He began, his voice gruff and clipped, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Audrey's mother hesitated, her eyes narrowing. Something about his tone, about the way he carried himself, felt off. The words didn't match the man delivering them. "Why?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I wasn't speeding." The man hesitated, just for a moment, before replying. "You were going over the limit." She shook her head, her grip on the wheel tightening. "No, I wasn't. I was doing 50. The limit's 60. The man's lips twitched, an almost imperceptible flicker of frustration crossing his face before he recovered his composure. "Step out of the car." "I won't ask again." Audrey could feel the tension in the air. Her mother's breathing had become shallow, her posture rigid. "No," her mother said, her voice hardening. "If I've done something wrong, you can explain it here." The man's face darkened, and for a brief moment, his expression changed. It wasn't anger, it was something far worse. Audrey couldn't find the words to describe it, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Her mother didn't wait for him to respond. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled up the window. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The man banged his fist against the glass, but her mother didn't flinch. With a sudden burst of speed, they were back on the highway, leaving the man standing in the darkness behind them. Audrey twisted in her seat to look back. The man stood motionless, his shadow stretching unnaturally long under the faint glow of his vehicle's lights, watching as they disappeared into the night. The car roared down the highway, its engine cutting through the oppressive silence of the night. Audrey clutched the seatbelt strapped across her chest, her heart racing as fast as the speedometer needle climbing steadily higher. Her mother's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that Audrey thought it might snap under the pressure. The faint glow of the dashboard lights illuminated her face, now etched with determination and fear. Behind them, the unmarked car was shrinking into the darkness. The flashing red and blue lights had disappeared, leaving only the distant memory of their unnatural flicker. Audrey craned her neck to glance out the rear window. The man wasn't following them, but something about his stillness as they had driven away haunted her mind. The phone in her mother's hand shook slightly as she dialed 911, balancing it against the wheel while keeping her eyes on the road. The glowing screen lit up her trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, an anchor in the chaos of the moment. We need help, her mother said, her voice taut with barely restrained panic. I was pulled over by someone pretending to be a police officer. He wasn't wearing a badge, no name tag, nothing official. Audrey watched her mother's face as she spoke. Every word seemed to release some of the tension coiled in her chest, though her eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, as if expecting the shadowy figure to materialize behind them again. Where are you now? The dispatcher asked. Highway 74, heading west, her mother replied. Her voice steadied slightly, but her breathing was still uneven. I didn't stop for long, but he wanted me to get out of the car. I didn't feel safe, so I left. You did the right thing, the dispatcher assured her. Stay on the line with me. Officers are on their way. Can you describe the man? Audrey's mother hesitated, her eyes narrowing in concentration. He was short, heavy-set, maybe 5'8". Scruffy-looking. He wasn't dressed like a real officer, just jeans and a jacket. He looked like someone trying to play a part, but... She trailed off, swallowing hard. Audrey leaned forward, her small voice breaking the tension. Mom, what if he follows us? Her mother glanced at her, a flicker of fear crossing her face. He won't, she said, though the words sounded more like an attempt to convince herself. The dispatcher interrupted. You need to keep driving until you reach a well-lit area or a public place. Don't stop, even if you think you're safe. Do you see any landmarks or exits ahead? Audrey's eyes darted toward the road. The highway seemed endless, stretching into a black void. The trees lining the road swayed slightly in the breeze, their branches forming dark, claw-like shapes. There's an exit about a mile ahead, her mother replied, her voice steadying. It leads to a gas station, I think. Good, the dispatcher said. Head there. Stay in your car when you arrive. Officers will meet you shortly. The minutes stretched out, each one feeling like an eternity. The car's headlights cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing patches of cracked pavement and faint road markings. Audrey tried to focus on the sound of the dispatcher's voice, but her mind kept drifting back to the man. What had he wanted? Why had he chosen them? Her mother broke the silence. Audrey, listen to me. Her tone was calm but firm, the same voice she used when giving important instructions. If anything happens, you stay in the car. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone, not even me, unless you're sure it's safe. Audrey nodded, her throat tight. Okay, Mom. His exit loomed ahead, its green sign glowing faintly in the headlights. Her mother slowed the car, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The gas station came into view, its fluorescent lights flickering like they were barely clinging to life. The parking lot was empty, save for a single truck parked near the entrance. Her mother pulled into a spot near the station's doors, keeping the engine running. She looked at Audrey, her expression softening slightly. We are okay now, she said, though the tension in her voice betrayed her words. The dispatcher spoke again. Officers are en route. Stay in the car and keep your doors locked. Audrey's mother nodded, her grip on the steering wheel relaxing slightly. For the first time since the encounter, she allowed herself to take a deep breath. But just as the weight in the car seemed to lift, a shadow moved at the edge of the lot. Audrey saw it first. Her eyes widened and she grabbed her mother's arm. Mom, someone's there. Her mother's head snapped toward the direction Audrey was pointing. At the far end of the lot, near the tree line, a figure stood half hidden in the shadows. It didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, watching. Her mother's hand hovered over the gearshift, ready to flee again if necessary. Stay calm, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure took a single step forward, the faint light from the gas station catching its form. It was the man. There was no mistaking him, the same scruffy face, the same unsettling presence. He didn't speak, didn't rush toward them. He just stood there, his head tilting slightly as if studying them. The sound of distant sirens broke the silence, faint but growing louder. The man seemed to notice too. Without warning, he turned and disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. Audrey's mother exhaled a shaky breath, her hands trembling on the wheel. They are here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The police arrived moments later, their flashing lights painting the gas station in hues of red and blue. Officers approached the car cautiously, their faces serious but kind. Audrey's mother recounted the night's events, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. As they spoke, Audrey glanced toward the tree line where the man had vanished. The shadows there seemed deeper, darker, as if holding secrets they weren't ready to share. A chill ran down her spine. That night, as they finally returned home, Audrey couldn't shake the image of the man standing in the shadows, his head tilted just so, as if he knew something they didn't. The sense of safety she once felt on long drives was gone, replaced by a lingering unease, and somewhere out there, she knew, he was still watching, waiting for his next opportunity. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the television the only light piercing the heavy darkness. Audrey and her mother sat side by side on the couch, their faces illuminated by the flickering images on the screen. The tension in the room was palpable, an invisible weight pressing down on them as the local news anchor spoke with calm urgency. Breaking news tonight, authorities are warning residents to be cautious of a man posing as a police officer. This individual has been linked to several incidents of attempted abductions along highways in the area. If you see this man or encounter suspicious behavior, call 911 immediately. The screen shifted to a grainy photograph of a man's face. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. Her mother stiffened beside her, her hand instinctively reaching out to grip Audrey's shoulder. It was him, the man from the highway. His scruffy beard, shadowed eyes, and unsettling grin were unmistakable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the television and the distant murmur of the anchor continuing to relay details. The image on the screen lingered like a ghost, embedding itself into Audrey's mind. Her mother broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's him. I knew something wasn't right. I knew it." Audrey turned to look at her, seeing the mixture of fear and relief etched on her face. Fear, because the man they had escaped was far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Relief, because they had escaped at all. "I can't believe it," Audrey murmured, her voice trembling. She glanced back at the screen, where the image of the man was replaced with footage of flashing police lights and a news ticker scrolling across the bottom. "What would have happened if you'd gotten out of the car?" Her mother didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the television, but she wasn't watching it anymore. Instead, she was staring through it, her mind racing through the possibilities. "None of them good. I don't know," she said finally, her voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "But I'm glad we didn't find out." The room fell silent again, the gravity of the moment settling over them like a cold blanket. Audrey hugged her knees to her chest, trying to push away the images flashing in her mind, the man's face, his ominous presence, the way he had stood in the shadows at the gas station. Her mother leaned forward and grabbed the remote, turning off the television. The room plunged into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. "We are safe now," her mother said, though her tone betrayed her lingering doubt. Audrey nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. Somewhere out there, the man was still roaming, still looking for his next victim. And as much as she wanted to forget, his face would haunt her every time she closed her eyes that night. Audrey and her mother slept with the doors locked, the lights on, and their sense of safety forever changed. The highway stretched into the distance, silent and empty under the pale glow of the moon. The trees lining the road loomed like sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, casting shifting shadows over the cracked asphalt. The once familiar sound of tires humming along the road was absent, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional whisper of the wind. Somewhere, hidden in the vast expanse of darkness, the faceless threat lingered, unseen but not forgotten. The warning on the news echoed in the air, a chilling reminder of the danger that had brushed so close. The quiet was deafening, an eerie contrast to the terror that had unfolded just hours ago. In the distance, the faint glimmer of headlights appeared, growing brighter as a lone car approached. The vehicle slowed as it passed the empty pull-off where Audrey and her mother had been, its driver unaware of the harrowing encounter that had taken place there. As the car disappeared into the night, the highway returned to its oppressive stillness. The darkness seemed heavier now, holding secrets that no one wanted to uncover. Somewhere out there, he was still watching, waiting, blending into the shadows. And the road remained silent.